Vampire King dismissed her sickness as just human frailty. He realizes it's poison and Chapter 1. The Collapse. Gallery opening had been a mistake. Celeste knew at the moment she stepped through the arched doorway into the old Blackwood estate, where crystal chandeliers trembled under the weight of too many candles, and the air smelled of aged wine and something darker, iron, perhaps, or rust. She'd come because her editor insisted, because hiding in her apartment for another month would mean admitting that Marcus had broken more than just her heart when he'd left her for her sister. But now, standing alone near a marble statue of some forgotten saint, she felt the familiar hollowness spreading through her chest again. The room spun. She gripped the pedestal beside her, fingers white against cold stone. Her vision blurred at the edges, dark spots blooming like ink and water. Not here, not now. She'd been so careful with her medication, so precise with her routines. But the dizziness didn't care about precision. "Miss, are you unwell?" The voice came from behind her, low, formal, with an accent she couldn't quite place. British, maybe, but older somehow, dustier. Celeste turned too quickly and her knees buckled. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. The world tilted sideways, and she found herself staring up into a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin that seemed to drink in the candlelight rather than reflect it. Eyes so dark they looked black in the dimness. "I'm fine," she whispered, though she very clearly wasn't. "You're not." His grip on her arms was firm but careful, as if she were made of glass. "When did you last eat?" "I don't. That's not. Your pulse is erratic." He said it with such certainty that she didn't think to question how he could possibly know. "And you're cold." "Too cold." She wanted to argue, but another wave of vertigo crashed over her, and she sagged against him. He smelled like old libraries and winter nights, nothing like Marcus's expensive cologne. Nothing like the antiseptic halls of the hospital where she'd spent too many weeks last year. "I'll take you somewhere quiet," he said. And it wasn't a question. She should have protested, should have pulled away, made some excuse, called a car. But her body had stopped listening to her sensible mind months ago, and right now, the only thing keeping her upright was this stranger's inexplicable strength. He guided her through the crowd with the ease of someone who knew exactly how to move through spaces without being noticed. No one looked at them. No one called out. It was as if they'd become invisible the moment his hands touched her shoulders. They passed through a servants' corridor she hadn't noticed before, down a narrow staircase lit by sconces that flickered like dying stars. The sounds of the party faded above them until all she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the whisper of his footsteps on stone. "Where are we going?" Her voice sounded small, childlike. "Somewhere you won't collapse in front of strangers." "You're a stranger." "Yes." He pushed open a heavy wooden door at the bottom of the stairs. "But I'm the one holding you upright." The room beyond was unlike anything she'd expected. No servants' quarters or storage closet. This was a library, vast and impossibly old, with shelves that stretched up into shadows the candlelight couldn't reach. A fire burned in a stone fireplace that looked medieval, its flames casting dancing shadows across Persian rugs and leather chairs worn soft with age. He lowered her into one of the chairs with surprising gentleness. "Stay there," he said, and disappeared into the darkness between the shelves. Celeste's head felt stuffed with cotton. She tried to catalog details: the way the firelight moved, the smell of old paper and leather, the odd silence that pressed against her ears like water. But her thoughts kept sliding away from her, slippery and unfocused. He returned with a crystal glass filled with something dark. Wine, probably. She didn't drink anymore. Not with her medications. But when he pressed it into her hands, she found herself obeying. Slowly, he cautioned. It wasn't wine. The liquid was thicker, sweeter, with an herbal undertone that made her think of grandmother's remedies and apothecary shops. She sipped obediently and felt warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold that had settled into her bones. "What is this?" "Something that will help." He crouched beside her chair, studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "You're ill." "Not just tonight, for some time." It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer. "The doctors can't fix it," he continued, still watching her with those impossibly dark eyes. "Or they've given up trying." Celeste's throat tightened. "How do you? I'm old enough to recognize suffering when I see it." He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and pressed 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist. "Your heart is working too hard." "Your blood is." He paused, frowning. "Wrong. That's a very medical diagnosis," she said weakly. "I'm not a doctor." He released her wrist, but didn't move away. But I know what dying looks like. The word landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. I'm not dying, Celeste said automatically. Though 3 different specialists had used variations of that word in the past 6 months. Degenerative, progressive, incurable. They meant the same thing, dressed up in kinder syllables. No, he agreed quietly. Not yet. But soon, if something doesn't change. She should have been frightened. Should have pulled away from this strange man in his impossible library, making impossible observations. But exhaustion had worn down her fear to nothing, and there was something almost comforting about his bluntness. Everyone else treated her like porcelain. He treated her like someone who could handle the truth. What's your name? She asked. He hesitated, as if the question required careful consideration. Dorian. Celeste. I know. At her surprised look, he gestured toward the gallery above them. Your photograph was in the exhibition program. The journalist who writes about forgotten things, art history, she corrected softly. I write about art history, forgotten things, he repeated, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across his severe features. Same thing. The fire crackled. The strange, sweet liquid in her glass had warmed her from the inside out, and for the first time in weeks, the pain in her joints had dulled to a manageable ache. Why did you help me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dorian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost didn't hear it. Because I remember what it's like to be alone when the world is ending. And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. Chapter 2. The vigil. Celeste woke to the sound of rain against leaded glass windows. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was too high, crossed with dark wooden beams that belonged to a different century. The air smelled of smoke and old paper, and beneath that, something faintly medicinal that she couldn't identify. Then memory returned in fragments. The gallery, the collapse. The stranger with impossible eyes, who'd carried her down into this library like she weighed nothing at all. She sat up slowly, testing her body for the usual morning betrayals. Her joints ached, but no worse than usual. Her head felt clearer than it had in days. She was lying on a velvet chaise near the fireplace, covered with a wool blanket that looked hand-woven and smelled faintly of lavender. You're awake, Celeste jumped. Dorian stood in the shadows near the bookshelves, so still she'd mistaken him for part of the furniture. He wore the same dark suit from the night before, though his collar was unbuttoned now, revealing a throat so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. What time is it? Her voice came out rough. Nearly noon. Noon? She pushed the blanket aside, panic fluttering in her chest. I've been here all night. You fell asleep after the second cup of tea. I thought it unwise to move you. He stepped into the firelight, and she noticed for the first time how carefully he avoided the thin streams of sunlight that leaked through gaps in the heavy curtains. Your phone has been ringing. I didn't answer it. Of course it had. Her editor would be furious. Her landlord was probably wondering why she hadn't picked up her medication from the pharmacy. The normal world, with its normal demands, waiting somewhere above this strange underground sanctuary. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. Should you? Dorian tilted his head, studying her with that unnerving intensity. Back to your empty apartment? Your unreturned calls? Your bottles of pills that aren't working? The accuracy of his assessment stung. You don't know anything about my life. I know you came to a gallery opening alone. I know. You haven't eaten properly in days. I could smell the ketones on your breath. I know you're taking at least 4 different medications that are contradicting each other. He moved closer, his footsteps utterly silent on the Persian rug. And I know you didn't fight when I brought you here, because some part of you was relieved to have someone else make decisions for once. Celeste's hands clenched in the blanket. That's not true? He crouched beside the chaise, bringing his eyes level with hers. You've been managing everything alone for months. The illness, the treatments, the betrayal. His gaze flickered to her left hand, where a pale band of skin still marked where she'd worn Marcus's ring. You're exhausted, Celeste. Not just from the disease, from carrying it all by yourself. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She looked away, focusing on the fire rather than his knowing stare. Why do you care? I'm not certain I do. His honesty was startling. But I'm curious. You're dying. Yet you came to an art opening to write about paintings no one remembers. You collapsed in a room full of people, and you were embarrassed rather than frightened. You're more concerned with inconveniencing others than with your own suffering. That's called being polite. That's called being alone so long. You've forgotten how to ask for help. The words hit like a physical blow. Celeste pressed her fingers against her eyes, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, silent. Bitter things that she'd been holding in since Marcus had packed his things and her sister had refused to return her calls. She expected him to retreat. Men always did when women cried. But Dorian stayed exactly where he was, close enough that she could feel the strange coolness radiating from his skin. I'm sorry, she managed. This is God. This is so inappropriate. You're a stranger, and I'm grieving, he finished quietly. Not just for your health, for everything you've lost alongside it. She nodded, not trusting her voice. For a long moment, the only sounds were the rain and the fire and her own shaky breathing. Then Dorian did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were cool and impossibly strong, his grip careful, as if he was afraid he might break her. I have a proposal, he said. Celeste looked up, wiping at her eyes with her free hand. What? Stay here. For a few days. Let me, he paused, choosing his words with visible care. Let me observe your condition. I may be able to help where your doctors have failed. You said you weren't a doctor. I'm not. But I'm very old, and I've seen many things that modern medicine has forgotten. His thumb moved absently against her wrist, tracing the vein beneath her skin. Your illness isn't natural. Something is wrong in your blood, something that shouldn't be there. The doctors said it's autoimmune. My body attacking itself? Yes. But why now? Why so suddenly? His eyes met hers, and she saw something fierce burning in their depths. You were healthy 6 months ago. What changed? She opened her mouth to say nothing had changed, but that wasn't quite true. 6 months ago, Marcus had surprised her with a trip to Scotland. They'd stayed in an old castle that had been converted to a hotel, explored ruins, drunk whiskey by peat fires. She'd come home exhausted but happy. 2 weeks later, the joint pain had started. I traveled, she said slowly, before I got sick, to Scotland. Dorian's grip on her hand tightened fractionally. Where in Scotland? The Highlands. We stayed in, she tried to remember the name. Blackmore Castle. It was beautiful, ancient. Something dark crossed Dorian's face. Blackmore. Do you know it? I know of it. He released her hand and stood, moving to the fireplace, where he stared into the flames. It's been abandoned for decades. The family that owned it, he stopped. Tell me, did you explore the ruins? Touch anything? Drink from any wells or springs? There was a spring in the garden. The hotel owner said it was blessed, supposed to grant wishes. She'd thought it was tourist nonsense. But Marcus had insisted they both drink from it. She remembered the water had tasted strange, metallic, and cold. Why? Dorian turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw genuine concern in his expression. Because some places remember what they were before they became ruins. And some blessings are curses wearing kinder names. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like fingers demanding entry. Celeste pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly cold again, despite the fire's warmth. You think something from that place made me sick? I think, Dorian said carefully, that you need to stay here while I find out. Will you? She should say no, should call a car, return to her normal life, her normal doctors with their normal explanations. But when she looked at Dorian, this strange, intense man who seemed to see through all her carefully maintained facades, she found herself nodding. Yes, she whispered. I'll stay. Something that might have been relief flickered across his features. Good. Then we begin tonight. Chapter 3. The Unnatural Horselist. Discovered Dorian's strangeness in increments. The first oddity revealed itself that evening when she ventured upstairs to retrieve her coat, and found the gallery completely empty. Not just closed, abandoned, as if the opening had been weeks ago rather than the night before. Dust motes drifted through shafts of dying light, and her footsteps echoed too loudly in the vacant halls. When she returned to the library, Dorian was exactly where she'd left him, standing motionless before a shelf of leather-bound books, his finger tracing the spine of one volume. Where is everyone? She asked. Gone. He didn't turn around. The estate is mine. The gallery opening was borrowed space, a favor to an acquaintance. So we're alone here? Does that worry you? It should have. Instead, she felt oddly relieved. No, the second strangeness came during dinner, or what should have been dinner. Dorian had prepared tea and brought her thin slices of bread with butter and honey, but he ate nothing himself. When she asked if he'd already eaten, he simply said, "I don't require food as you do." She'd laughed, thinking it was a joke about masculine appetites or aristocratic eating schedules. But he didn't smile. Now, past midnight, she watched him from the chaise as he moved through the library, lighting candles. He'd asked her to stay awake tonight, said he needed to observe her during her worst hours. She hadn't told him that the pain always intensified after dark, that her joints felt like they were filled with ground glass once the sun went down. He knew anyway. "You don't sleep," she said suddenly. Dorian paused, a lit taper in his hand. "What makes you say that? You're wearing the same clothes. Your hair hasn't moved. You haven't yawned once." She sat up straighter, ignoring the protest in her spine. "And you're too still. People move when they're tired, shift their weight, stretch. You could be carved from marble." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set down the taper and crossed to where she sat, lowering himself into the chair opposite hers. The firelight caught the sharp planes of his face, casting his eyes into deeper shadow. "You're observant," he said quietly. "I'm a researcher. It's my job to notice details. And what details have you noticed about me, Celeste?" She met his gaze, her heart beating faster. "You avoid sunlight. You don't eat or sleep. Your skin is cold, but you're not sick. You move without sound." And she hesitated. "You knew exactly what my pulse was doing last night, just from touching my wrist." "Go on." "You said you were old enough to recognize suffering. You said you'd seen things modern medicine has forgotten." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "How old are you, Dorian?" The question hung between them like smoke. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt artificial. Dorian leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Old enough to remember when Blackmore Castle was new," he said finally. "When its wells ran clear, before they were poisoned by the things that lived beneath the stones." Celeste's mouth went dry. "That castle is from the 14th century, 1523, to be precise. I attended its dedication." His eyes never left hers. "I was already ancient then." She should have laughed, should have stood up and left, called for help, done any of the sensible things a rational person would do when faced with an obvious delusion. But the pain in her bones was real, and the metallic taste of that Scottish spring water was suddenly vivid in her memory. And Dorian's stillness, his terrible, perfect stillness, made a horrible kind of sense. "You're not human," she whispered. "No, what are you?" He tilted his head, considering her with something that might have been respect. "Your people have many names for what I am. Most of them are wrong. But the oldest word, the truest one," he paused. "Vampire." The word should have been ridiculous. It belonged to movies and paperback novels, not to elegant libraries and rational conversation. But looking at Dorian in the candlelight, at his unlined face and ancient eyes, Celeste found she believed him. "You drink blood," she said, testing the reality of it. "Yes. You've killed people." "Yes." No hesitation, no shame. "Though not recently. I've lived long enough to learn restraint, and the thing that made me sick at Blackmore, that was something like you." "No," his expression darkened. "Something much older, much worse. The thing in that well predates even my kind. It was bound there centuries ago by blood magic, sealed with oaths and sacrifice." He leaned forward. "Tell me, when you drank from the spring, did you make a wish?" She thought back to that afternoon, Marcus's hand warm in hers, the hotel owner smiling as he explained the tradition. "Yes, I wished." Her throat tightened. "I wished to be loved." Dorian's jaw clenched. "And within weeks, the man who brought you there betrayed you. Marcus left me for my sister." The words still hurt to say, because the thing in the well doesn't grant wishes. It corrupts them, twists them into curses. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "It tasted your blood when you drank, marked you. And now it's killing you slowly, feeding on your life force across the distance." Celeste's vision blurred. "There's no cure. The doctors said the doctors don't know what they're treating. They see symptoms without understanding the source." His thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture oddly soothing despite the coolness of his skin. "But I do. And I know how to break the connection." Hope flared in her chest, painful and bright. "How?" "Blood for blood. The binding must be severed at its source." His eyes met hers, dark and infinite. "I need to take you back to Blackmore, to the well. And I need to feed the thing that's poisoning you something it wants more than your slow death. What does it want? Dorian's expression was grim. Vampire blood. Old blood. The kind of power it hasn't tasted in centuries. Understanding dawned slowly. You're going to let it feed on you, if necessary. That's insane. You said it was worse than vampires. More dangerous it is. He squeezed her hand gently. But you're dying, Celeste. And I find that I'm not willing to simply observe that process. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. You don't know me. We met yesterday, because you're the first person in a century to look at me and see past what I am to who I might be. Because you didn't run when I told you the truth. Because he stopped, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Because being alone for 700 years teaches you to recognize when someone is worth saving. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they weren't bitter. When do we leave? 3 days. You need to regain your strength first, and I need to make certain preparations. He released her hand and stood. But tonight, you should rest. The pain will worsen before dawn. He was right. Already she could feel the familiar ache intensifying, spreading from her joints into her muscles, her bones. But when Dorian moved to leave, she caught his sleeve. Stay, she said softly. Please, I don't want to be alone. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. After a moment, he nodded and settled back into his chair, close enough that she could reach him if the pain became too much. I'm here, he said simply, and somehow, that was enough. Chapter 4. Small merciless pain came in waves. Just as Dorian had predicted, Celeste tried to hide it at first, old habits from months of suffering alone, but he noticed anyway. He always noticed. Around 2 in the morning, when her breathing grew shallow and her fingers clenched white against the blanket, he moved from his chair to kneel beside the chaise. Where is it worst? He asked. My spine. And my hands. She couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. It feels like something's trying to crack me open from the inside. The entity is feeding. It's strongest during the darkest hours. He touched her shoulder carefully. May I? She nodded, not certain what she was agreeing to. Dorian's hands moved to her upper back, his fingers finding the knots of tension along her spine with uncanny precision. His touch was cool but not unpleasant, and as he applied pressure to specific points, the pain began to ebb. Not disappear, nothing could make it disappear, but it became bearable again. How do you know how to do this? She breathed. I've had 700 years to study the human body, its weaknesses, its pressure points. His voice was low, almost meditative. And I've spent many of those years trying to cause less suffering than I once did. You're trying to atone. His hands stilled for a moment. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm simply tired of being what I was made to be. She turned her head to look at him. In the firelight, his face held an expression she hadn't seen before, something old and weary and achingly sad. What were you, before? A weapon. His hands resumed their work, moving to the base of her neck. My house, the bloodline that turned me. We were created to hunt, to kill. We served kings and emperors, eliminated their enemies, and forced their will through fear. He paused. I was very good at it. And now? Now I live in libraries, and refuse invitations to court intrigue. I collect books no one reads, and help dying strangers who stumble into gallery openings. A bitter smile touched his lips. My house considers me a disgrace. They're wrong, Celeste said quietly. He met her eyes, surprised. You can't know that. I know you've spent 2 days caring for someone you don't owe anything to. I know you're planning to risk yourself to save me from something most people would call impossible. She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through her ribs. That's not disgrace. That's honor. Dorian was silent for a long moment, his hands resting warm against her shoulders. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. You should rest now. The worst has passed for tonight. But Celeste wasn't ready to retreat into sleep and pain. Tell me something true, she said. Something you haven't told anyone in a long time. Why? Because I want to know you. And because she hesitated. Because if we're going to do this dangerous thing together, I need to understand who you are when you're not being careful. He considered this, his expression unreadable. Then he rose and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as he spoke. I had a sister once, human, before I was turned. His voice was barely above a whisper. Elena, she was 12 when the plague took her. I was 17 and already apprenticed to a physician, already arrogant enough to think I could save her. He touched the mantle, his fingers tracing invisible patterns. I failed. And 3 months later, when a vampire found me half dead in an alley, I was angry enough at God to accept his offer of immortality. Celeste pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the protest from her body. What was her favorite thing? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? Your sister. What did she love? Birds? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She would sit in the garden for hours, watching them. She said they were proof that God loved beautiful, useless things. His hand fell to his side. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear them sing. And now I've learned that beautiful, useless things are sometimes the only ones worth preserving. He turned back to her. She would have liked you, I think. You have her stubbornness. I'm not stubborn. I'm just too tired to give up. Same thing. He returned to his chair, settling into it with that preternatural stillness. Tell me something true, Celeste. Something you haven't admitted to anyone. She knew what he was doing, creating balance, turning her request back on her. It was fair. I'm not afraid of dying, she said slowly. I'm afraid of dying without having lived. Marcus, the betrayal, it wasn't just that he left. It's that I realized I'd spent 3 years making myself smaller to fit into his life. I gave up the research trips I wanted to take. Didn't apply for the fellowship in Florence. Stopped writing the book I'd been working on. She laughed bitterly. And then he left anyway. For someone who never made herself small at all. Your sister. My beautiful, confident, selfish sister, who takes what she wants and never apologizes. The words came out sharper than she intended. I've been invisible my whole life, Dorian. The quiet one. The careful one. The one who colored inside the lines. She met his eyes. And now I'm dying. And I still haven't figured out how to be anything else. Dorian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You walked into a stranger's library and stayed the night. You believed me when I told you I was a vampire. You agreed to travel to Scotland to confront an ancient curse. His expression was intent. Those aren't the actions of someone who colors inside the lines. Those are the actions of someone who has nothing left to lose. No, his voice was firm. They're the actions of someone who's finally brave enough to live. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and unexpected, and somehow exactly what she needed to hear. Outside, the first gray hints of dawn were touching the windows, and Celeste felt the pain in her body beginning to recede with the darkness. Sleep now, Dorian said, his voice gentler. Tomorrow we begin preparing for the journey. You'll need your strength. She wanted to argue, to keep talking, to hold on to this strange intimacy a little longer. But exhaustion was pulling at her, and Dorian's presence, steady and unchanging, made her feel safe enough to surrender to it. Will you be here? She asked, already half asleep. When I wake up. Yes. Promise? I promise. And when her eyes closed and her breathing evened out, Dorian remained exactly where he was, watching over her as the sun rose beyond the heavy curtains. Keeping a promise to a dying woman who'd somehow, impossibly, made him remember what it felt like to care. Chapter 5. The uninvited Celeste woke to the sound of breaking glass. For a disoriented moment, she thought she'd dreamed it, some fragment of nightmare bleeding into morning. But then she heard voices upstairs, sharp and male, speaking in a language that sounded like French, but older, harsher. She sat up too quickly, pain lancing through her ribs. The library was empty. Dorian's chair sat vacant beside the dying fire, and pale afternoon light filtered through gaps in the curtains. She'd slept longer than she'd intended. The voices grew louder, accompanied by footsteps. Multiple sets, moving through the rooms above with the confidence of people who belonged there. Celeste's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around for her phone, her shoes, any way to escape or call for help. But before she could move, the library door swung open, 3 men entered, and the word men felt insufficient for what they were. They moved like Dorian moved, too fluid, too precise, and their eyes held the same ageless quality. Though their faces were younger, sharper, crueler, the one in front wore an expensive suit, and had hair so pale it was almost white. He smiled when he saw her, and his teeth were very straight and very white. Well, he said, in accented English. This is unexpected. Celeste pressed herself back against the chaise, her mind racing. Who are you? I should ask you the same question. He crossed the library with lazy confidence, his companions flanking him. What is a dying mortal doing in Dorian Blackwood's private sanctuary? The way he said dying made her skin crawl, as if he could smell it on her, taste it in the air. I'm a guest, she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. A guest. The pale vampire tilted his head, inhaling deeply. No, project perhaps. Or a meal he's saving for later. He leaned closer, and she could see her reflection in his dark pupils. He always did have peculiar tastes, Laurent. Dorian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his expression carved from ice, and for the first time Celeste saw the predator he must have been before he chose libraries over courts. The air around him felt colder, heavier, as if gravity itself bent toward him. The pale vampire Laurent straightened but didn't retreat. Dorian, we knocked, but you didn't answer, so you broke my windows. A misunderstanding. Laurent's smile never reached his eyes. Lucien thought the house was empty. You so rarely keep company anymore. The vampire named Lucien, a dark-haired man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, shrugged unapologetically. The third remained silent, watching Celeste with unblinking intensity. Dorian moved between them and Celeste with deliberate slowness, placing himself as a barrier. State your business and leave. Our business? Laurent's gaze slid past Dorian to Celeste. We heard rumors that you were seen at the gallery opening with Immortal, that you carried her away like some lovesick knight. He laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. We had to see for ourselves if the infamous Dorian Blackwood had finally lost his restraint. She's under my protection, Dorian said flatly. Protection from what? Herself? Laurent circled them slowly, forcing Dorian to turn to keep him in sight. She reeks of death, brother. Whatever illness is consuming her, it's beyond mortal medicine. Why prolong her suffering? That's not your concern, but it is. Laurent stopped, his expression hardening. When one of House Blackwood breaks centuries of solitude for a dying mortal, it becomes everyone's concern. The other houses are asking questions. They want to know if you're planning something. If this, he gestured at Celeste, is part of some scheme. There's no scheme. Then what is she? Dorian's jaw tightened. None of your affair. He's going to turn her, Lucien said suddenly, his voice rough. That's why she's here. He's waiting for her to get close enough to death that she'll beg for it. No, Dorian said. But Celeste heard something in his voice, not guilt exactly, but an acknowledgement that the thought had crossed his mind. Laurent's smile returned, sharper now. Is that it, Dorian? Have you finally decided to build yourself a companion? Someone to ease the loneliness of your self-imposed exile? Get out. The house elders won't approve. You know the laws about turning mortals without consent. Without proper vetting, I said get out. Dorian's voice dropped to something that wasn't quite human, resonant with power that made the candles flicker and the windows rattle in their frames. For the first time, Laurent looked uncertain. He glanced at his companions, then back at Dorian. We're not your enemies, brother. We're trying to help you avoid making a mistake that could bring the council down on all of us. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Dorian took a step forward, and even Celeste could feel the threat radiating from him. You have 10 seconds to leave my home before I demonstrate exactly why the house elders sent me on their most delicate missions for 3 centuries. The silence stretched taut as wire. Then Laurent inclined his head in a mockery of a bow. As you wish. But this conversation isn't finished. Yes, Dorian said quietly. It is. The 3 vampires moved toward the door with visible reluctance, Laurent pausing at the threshold. She's dying, Dorian. Whatever you think you're doing, it won't save her. And when she's gone, you'll still be alone. Think about that. Then they were gone, their footsteps receding up the stairs and out into the afternoon. Dorian remained motionless until Celeste heard the front door close. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and when he turned to face her, the cold fury had drained from his expression, leaving only concern. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though her hands were trembling. Who were they? Members of my house. He paused. My former brothers. In a sense, we share the same bloodline, the same maker. They think you're going to turn me into a vampire. Yes, are you? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Dorian moved to the fireplace, bracing his hands against the mantel. No, not without your explicit consent, and not before every other option is exhausted. He looked back at her. I won't take your mortality from you, Celeste, even to save your life, but you've thought about it. Of course I have. His honesty was brutal. You're dying, and I have the power to prevent that. The thought is persistent, but turning someone out of desperation or pity creates monsters, not companions. I learned that lesson centuries ago. Celeste stood on shaky legs and crossed to him, ignoring the way her body protested. What if I asked? What if I wanted it? You don't know what you'd be asking for. He turned to face her fully. Immortality isn't freedom, Celeste. It's an endless chain of consequences, of watching everyone you love turn to dust while you remain unchanged. It's beautiful and terrible and utterly lonely. You're lonely, she said softly. Yes, and you think turning me would make that worse. I think turning you because I'm lonely would be the most selfish thing I've ever done. His eyes met hers. And I've done many selfish things. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the coolness of his skin, the inhuman strength held carefully in check. Then we'll find another way. We'll go to Blackmore, break the curse, and I'll live as a human. And if we fail, then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have lived before I died. She squeezed his hand. That's more than I had a week ago. Dorian looked down at their joined hands, something raw and vulnerable crossing his features. They'll be watching now. Laurent will report to the house elders, and they'll send someone to investigate. When we leave for Scotland, we'll have to be careful. How careful? Very. He met her eyes. Because if they think I'm planning to turn you against house law, they won't wait for explanations. They'll kill you to prevent it. Fear spiked through her, cold and sharp. Can they do that? They can try. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. But I've survived 700 years by being very good at protecting what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. We leave tomorrow, Dorian said. At sunset. Pack light, we won't be returning here. Where will we go after? If we survive? He smiled faintly. Somewhere even my house won't think to look. I have friends in unusual places. Friends who won't ask questions. Friends who owe me favors too large to refuse. He released her hand and moved toward the door. Rest now. Tomorrow will be difficult, and you'll need all your strength. But as he reached the threshold, Celeste called out, Dorian? He turned. Thank you. For protecting me. For everything. His expression softened. Don't thank me yet, Celeste. We haven't survived this story. Chapter 6. Blood and Truth. Night fell like a curtain, and with it came preparation. Celeste watched from the library doorway as Dorian moved through the estate with purpose. Gathering items she didn't recognize, vials of dark liquid, silver instruments that looked medieval, bundles of dried herbs bound with red thread. He worked in silence, his movements economical and precise, and she realized she was seeing him as he must have been centuries ago, a weapon being sharpened for war. What is all this? She asked finally. Protection. He held up a small glass bottle filled with something that shimmered like oil. Consecrated ash mixed with vampire blood. It will mask your scent from other immortals, make you harder to track. Whose blood? Mine. He set the bottle in a leather satchel alongside the other items. And before you ask, yes, it will hurt, but only for a moment. She stepped into the room, drawn by morbid curiosity. How does it work? I mark you with sigils, old symbols that predate written language. The ash carries my blood into your skin, creating a resonance. To other vampires, you'll seem like an extension of me rather than separate prey. He paused. It's intimate magic. Binding magic. If you're not comfortable, I trust you, she said, surprised by how much she meant it. Something shifted in his expression, gratitude, perhaps, or relief. Then we should do it now, before we leave. It needs time to settle into your system. He led her to a clear space near the fireplace and gestured for her to sit. When she lowered herself onto the Persian rug, he knelt across from her, the satchel open between them. The firelight caught the planes of his face, making him look carved from shadow and flame. Give me your wrist, he said quietly. She extended her right hand. He took it carefully, turning it palm up to expose the delicate network of veins beneath her skin. With his free hand, he retrieved the bottle of ashen blood, uncorking it with his teeth. This will burn, he warned, and then it will feel like ice. Try not to pull away. I won't. He dipped 2 fingers into the mixture and began to paint symbols on her inner wrist, spirals and crosses and marks that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed slightly outside of normal vision. The burning started immediately, sharp and bright, like touching a hot stove. Celeste bit her lip, but held still. Good, Dorian murmured, his concentration absolute. You're stronger than you think. The burning intensified, spreading up her arm in waves that made her vision blur. Then, just as she thought she couldn't bear it anymore, the ice came cold, so profound it stole her breath. She gasped, and Dorian's free hand caught hers, anchoring her. Breathe through it. It's almost done. She focused on his voice, on the warmth of his hand against hers, and gradually the sensations faded to a tolerable ache. When she looked down, the symbols had disappeared into her skin, leaving only faint silver traces that gleamed when they caught the light. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Different." She flexed her fingers experimentally. "Lighter somehow. Like something that was weighing me down just lifted." The curse recognizes the binding. "It knows your claim now that feeding on you means confronting me." He released her hand slowly. "The entity won't like that. It may fight harder when we reach the well. Then we'll fight back." She met his eyes. "Together." He smiled faintly. "Yes, together." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Then Celeste asked the question that had been building since Lawrence's visit. What did he mean about turning mortals without consent? Is there a law? Dorian's expression darkened. "Several laws, actually. The vampire houses have strict rules about creating new immortals. It requires approval from the council, extensive vetting of the candidate, proof that they understand what they're choosing." He stood, moving to add wood to the fire. "Too many vampires have turned mortals impulsively out of loneliness or desire or simple cruelty. The results are almost always catastrophic. What happens to those vampires? The ones turned badly? They go mad. The transformation requires a strong will and a clear purpose. Without those, the new vampire becomes consumed by bloodlust, loses all sense of themselves." His voice was heavy. "I've had to kill 3 such creatures. Mortals I knew, people I cared about, who begged for immortality without understanding the price." "Is that why you left the house?" "Why? You live alone." "Part of it." He stared into the flames. "I grew tired of watching people I thought I loved lose themselves to the hunger. Tired of being used as a weapon by the elders. Tired of pretending that immortality was a gift rather than a beautiful prison." He turned to face her. "So I withdrew. Made myself useless to their politics. Spent decades just existing, reading, collecting knowledge no one else cared about." "That sounds lonely." "It was. It is." He moved back to where she sat, lowering himself to the rug beside her. But loneliness seemed preferable to causing more harm. Celeste studied his profile, the way the firelight softened his severe features. "You're not what I expected a vampire to be." "What did you expect?" "Someone more predatory, dangerous." She smiled slightly. "You're dangerous, but you're also kind, careful. You notice when people are suffering and you try to help. I notice suffering because I've caused so much of it." His voice was rough. "Every kindness is an attempt at balance, Celeste. Don't mistake that for virtue." "I'm not." She shifted closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "But I think you're trying to be better than what you were. And that matters." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the centuries in his eyes, all the grief and guilt and weary hope of someone who'd lived too long and lost too much. "You matter," he said quietly. "In case no one's told you that recently." The words hit her harder than they should have. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unexpected. "Dorian, I mean it." He reached out, his cool fingers brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You walked into my life 3 days ago, and somehow you've reminded me why I chose to keep living when dying would have been simpler." His thumb traced the curve of her jaw. "That's a rare gift." She turned her face into his palm, letting herself lean into the contact. His skin was cool, but not cold, and being close to him felt like standing in the eye of a storm, safe despite the chaos swirling around them. "We should go," he said, but he didn't move. "The car is ready. We can reach Scotland by dawn if we leave now. And then we face whatever's waiting at that well. We break the curse binding you to it. And we survive." He pulled back slightly, his hand falling away from her face. "Or we don't. But either way, you won't face it alone." Celeste stood, offering him her hand. When he took it and rose to his feet, she held on a moment longer than necessary. "Promise me something. Anything. If this goes wrong, if the entity is too strong, if I don't make it, promise you won't blame yourself. Promise you'll keep living. Keep trying to be better." His jaw tightened. "Celeste, promise me, Dorian." He was silent for a long moment. Then reluctantly, he nodded. "I promise. But only if you promise the same, that you'll fight with everything you have. That you won't give up. I promise." They stood there, hands clasped, 2 people bound by magic and circumstance, and something neither of them had named yet. Outside, the night waited, vast and full of danger. "Let's go," Celeste said. "Before I lose my nerve." Dorian's lips quirked in something almost like a smile. You've never lacked nerve. Only reasons to use it, and together, they walked out into the darkness, towards Scotland and the cursed well, and whatever fate waited for them there. Chapter 7. The Seagadi were 3 hours from Blackmore when the attack came. Celeste had been dozing in the passenger seat of Dorian's vintage car, lulled by the rhythm of the road and the weight of exhaustion. The ash marks on her wrist had settled into a steady warmth, and for the first time in months, the pain in her joints had dulled to almost nothing. She woke to the sound of shattering glass. The rear window exploded inward in a spray of crystalline fragments. Dorian yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending the car careening onto the shoulder as something dark and fast struck the roof with enough force to dent the metal. Get down, he shouted. Celeste threw herself toward the floorboards as another impact rocked the vehicle. Through the broken window, she glimpsed a figure on the road behind them, tall and humanly fast, gaining ground despite the car's speed. Dorian cursed in a language she didn't recognize and accelerated. The engine roared in protest, but the speedometer climbed past 90, past 100. The figure fell back slightly, then leaped impossibly high and landed on the trunk with a crash that buckled the metal. Lawrence people, Dorian bit out. They followed us. The car swerved as whoever was on the trunk punched through the roof. Pale fingers tipped with black nails reached through the hole and grabbed for the headrest. Dorian drew a silver blade from somewhere inside his coat and slashed backward, severing the fingers. The hand jerked back with an inhuman shriek. The satchel, Dorian said urgently. There's iron powder in a red pouch. Throw it behind us. Celeste scrambled for the bag at her feet, her hands shaking as she fumbled through the contents. She found the pouch and tore it open, the powder inside glinting like ground metal. Now, she twisted in her seat and flung the powder through the broken rear window. It hit their attacker full in the face, a female vampire with wild eyes and blood-streaked hair. She screamed, a sound like tearing silk, and tumbled off the car onto the road. But there were more. 2 figures stepped out of the darkness ahead, directly in their path. Dorian didn't slow. Instead, he aimed straight for them, his expression carved from ice. At the last second, the vampires dove aside, and the car rocketed past. How many? Celeste gasped. At least 5. Maybe more. He took a sharp turn onto a narrow side road, the tires screaming. They're not trying to kill us yet, just slow us down until reinforcements arrive. What happens when the reinforcements get here? Nothing good. He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting red in the darkness. There's an abandoned church 2 miles ahead. We can make a stand there. Holy ground still has power over our kind. The road twisted through dense forest, branches scraping against the windows. Behind them, headlights appeared, 3 sets, gaining fast. Celeste's heart hammered against her ribs as Dorian pushed the car faster. Navigating the treacherous curves with preternatural precision, the church appeared suddenly. A crumbling stone structure, barely visible among the trees. Dorian slammed on the brakes, sending the car skidding sideways into the overgrown courtyard. Before it fully stopped, he was out, moving to her side with inhuman speed. Can you run? She nodded, though her legs felt like water. He grabbed the satchel in her hand, pulling her toward the church entrance. The heavy wooden door hung crooked on its hinges, and beyond it, darkness yawned like an open mouth. They crossed the threshold just as the first attacker reached the courtyard. Dorian turned, raising one hand in a gesture that looked almost like a benediction. The vampire, a male with Lawrence's pale hair, hit an invisible barrier at the entrance and recoiled with a hiss. Holy ground, Dorian said quietly. They can't enter without invitation. Celeste sagged against a broken pew, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Around them, the church was in ruins, roof partially collapsed, altar overturned, stained glass windows reduced to jagged shards. But the walls still stood, and apparently, that was enough. Outside, the vampires circled like wolves. She counted 6 of them now, their faces pale blurs in the darkness. Lawrence stood among them, his expression murderous. This is foolish, Dorian, he called out. You can't stay in there forever. I don't need forever. Dorian set the satchel down and began pulling out items, more vials, weapons Celeste couldn't name. Just until dawn. Dawn is 6 hours away. We're patient. And I'm prepared. He drew a silver sword from the satchel's depths. It shouldn't have fit, but somehow did, and tested its weight. Tell the elders they've made a mistake. The mortal is under my protection. This ends now, or it ends badly for all of you. Lucien stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with something between pity and contempt. She's dying anyway, brother. Why risk house war over someone who'll be dead in weeks? Because she deserves more than weeks. Dorian's voice was cold steel. Because every life matters, even the brief ones. Especially the brief ones. Sentiment, Lawrence sneered. This is why you were always weak. Too much human heart left in your vampire chest, and you have no heart at all. That's why the elders sent you. They knew you'd feel nothing about killing an innocent. There are no innocents, Dorian. Only prey and predators. She's prey. You've just forgotten which one you are. Celeste pushed herself upright, anger cutting through her fear. I'm right here, she called out. Stop talking about me like I can't hear you. The vampire's attention snapped to her, and she immediately regretted speaking. Their eyes were wrong to bright, to hungry. Lawrence's smile was a predator's smile. The prey speaks. Tell me, little mortal, do you know what your protector really is? How many he's killed? The screams he's drawn from throats just like yours? I know enough, Celeste said, forcing strength into her voice. I know he's trying to save me, while you're trying to murder me for politics. I know which one I'd rather trust. Touching. Lawrence's smile widened. But trust won't save you when the sun sets tomorrow and we're still here. When he's weakened from day sleep, and you're alone with us. Dorian moved to stand beside her, the sword gleaming in his hand. She won't be alone. You can't stay awake through the day. None of us can. The sun will force you into torpor. And then she's ours. Then you'll have to get past the wards first. Dorian pulled out a piece of chalk and began drawing symbols on the floor, the same spiraling marks he'd painted on Celeste's wrist. And I promise you, Laurent, these will hold longer than my consciousness. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lawrence's face. What are you doing? Something I should have done decades ago. Something the house elders fear more than anything. He finished the final symbol and turned to Celeste. I'm binding myself to her completely. My strength to her will. My life to hers. That's forbidden. I don't care. Dorian's eyes never left Celeste's. If she dies, I die. And if anyone tries to harm her, they'll have to kill me first. Completely. Finally. He smiled grimly. Are you prepared for that, brother? Are any of you prepared to commit house murder over one mortal life? The silence that followed was absolute. Lawrence's expression shifted through rage to calculation, to something almost like respect. You've gone mad, perhaps. Or perhaps I've finally found something worth the madness. Dorian extended his hand to Celeste. But the choice is yours. This binding, it means my survival depends on yours. If the entity kills you, it kills me too. If you want me to find another way, do it, Celeste said without hesitation. She placed her hand in his. Bind us. His fingers tightened around hers. This will hurt worse than the ash. I don't care. Do it. Dorian pulled her into the center of the chalk circle and began to speak in that ancient language, words that seemed to pull at the fabric of reality itself. The marks on her wrist blazed with sudden heat, and she felt something enormous shift inside her, like a door opening, like two rivers merging into one. Outside, the vampires began to scream. Chapter 8. The aftermath. The binding tore through Celeste like lightning. She felt Dorian's essence flood into her 700 years of memories, grief, hunger, and in loneliness so vast it made her want to weep. But beneath it all was something fiercer, his will, iron-hard and unyielding, wrapping around her fragile mortality like armor. Her knees buckled. Dorian caught her, lowering them both to the church floor as the ritual completed. The chalk symbols flared white-hot, then faded to ash. Outside, the screaming had stopped. The vampires stood frozen at the threshold, staring at them with expressions ranging from horror to fury. Lawrence's face had gone corpse pale. You absolute fool, he breathed. Do you understand what you've done? The council will execute you for this. Let them try. Dorian's voice was hoarse, but steady. He still held Celeste against his chest, his arms trembling with effort. I'm done living by their rules. Those rules kept us civilized, kept us from becoming the monsters humans fear. No, those rules kept us controlled. There's a difference. Dorian's grip on Celeste tightened protectively. Now leave. You have your answer. I won't turn her, and you can't kill her without killing me. We're at an impasse. Lucien stepped forward, his expression conflicted. Dorian, think about what happens next. If she dies at Blackmore, you die too. Is she really worth? Yes. The word was absolute. Now go. For a long moment, the vampires didn't move. Then Laurent made a sharp gesture, and one by one, they melted back into the darkness. Only Laurent remained, his eyes fixed on Celeste with unsettling intensity. I hope she's worth it, he said quietly. I hope when you're both dead, you remember this moment, and think it was worth the price. Then he too, was gone. And they were alone in the ruined church, with only the wind and the distant sound of engines fading into the night. Celeste became aware of several things at once, that she was shaking violently, that Dorian's heart was beating against her back slow and strong and nothing like a human pulse, and that she could feel him inside her mind. Not his thoughts exactly, but his presence, vast and ancient and oddly comforting. I can feel you, she whispered. I know. I can feel you too. His voice was soft against her hair. Your fear, your pain, the curse eating at you from the inside. A pause. And your courage. God, Celeste, you're so much braver than you know. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. That's what bravery is. Being terrified and doing it anyway. He shifted slightly, helping her sit upright so she could face him. His eyes were exhausted, shadows like bruises beneath them. How do you feel? The binding, did it hurt you? Yes, but I'm okay. She touched her chest, where a new warmth had settled near her heart. Is this permanent? Until one of us dies, yes. Our lives are linked now. If the entity kills you, it kills you too. She met his eyes. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have risked yourself for me. Too late for regrets. A ghost of a smile. Besides, I haven't felt this alive in centuries. Apparently impending doom agrees with me. Despite everything, she laughed, a short, slightly hysterical sound. You're insane, probably. He touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. But I meant what I said out there. You're worth it. Whatever happens at Blackmore, I don't regret this. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that somewhere in the past for days he'd become essential to her in a way she couldn't explain. But the words caught in her throat, tangled with fear and hope, and something that felt dangerously close to love. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing together in the darkness, connected in ways that went deeper than flesh and blood. We should rest, Dorian said eventually. Dawn is close, and I'll need to sleep through the day. The wards I set will hold, but you'll be alone until sunset. I'll be fine. Will you? His concern was palpable through the bond. If Laurent comes back, he won't. He's afraid of you now. She pulled back enough to see his face. They all are. You bound yourself to a dying mortal rather than let them have me. That's not the action of someone playing by their rules. No, he agreed quietly. It's the action of someone who's finally found something he's not willing to lose. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Celeste's breath caught. Dorian, don't. He stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. Don't say anything you might regret when this is over. When you're healthy again and realize you're bound to a monster who can't give you sunlight or children, or any of the things you deserve. You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. So have I. At his skeptical look, she continued. I let Marcus make me small. I stopped speaking to my sister because she was everything I wasn't. I've spent years being bitter and careful and so afraid of being hurt that I hurt myself instead. Her voice strengthened. We've all done things we regret, Dorian. That doesn't make us monsters. It makes us people trying to survive. He stared at her, something raw and wounded in his expression. You're too generous, and you're too hard on yourself. She took his hand, feeling the coolness of his skin, the strength held carefully in check. Now show me how these wards work, so I know you'll be safe while you sleep. He hesitated, then nodded. For the next hour, he walked her through the protective symbols he'd drawn, explaining which ones would burn intruders, which would alert her to danger, which would hold against physical and magical assault. His voice grew slower as dawn approached, exhaustion pulling at him despite his efforts to hide it. When the first gray light touched the broken windows, he swayed on his feet. Sleep, Celeste said firmly. I'll watch over you. You need rest too. I'll sleep after you do. I need to make sure the wards hold first. It was a lie. She was too wired to sleep, but he was too tired to argue. Dorian found a relatively intact section of floor and lay down, his movements increasingly sluggish. The sun's influence was undeniable, pulling him toward the death-like sleep all vampires endured during daylight hours. Celeste, he murmured, his eyes already closing. If something happens, if they get past the wards, nothing will happen. Rest. Promise me you'll run. Don't try to fight them. Just run and don't look back. I promise, she lied. His hand found hers, squeezed once, then went slack as unconsciousness claimed him. His breathing slowed to something barely perceptible, his body going utterly still. She'd never seen anything so disturbing and so peaceful at once. Celeste settled beside him, her back against a broken pew, and watched the sun rise through the shattered windows. The light didn't reach where Dorian lay. He'd chosen his spot carefully, but it illuminated the church's ruins, turning everything golden and soft. She could feel him through the bond, a quiet presence in the back of her mind. His dreams, if vampires dreamed, were dark and full of old sorrows. She sent him what comfort she could, warmth and safety, and the promise that he wasn't alone anymore. The day stretched ahead, vast and uncertain. Somewhere ahead lay Blackmore and the cursed well and the entity that was slowly killing her. But here, in this moment, she had Dorian's trust and her own newfound courage. It would have to be enough. Chapter 9. The wealthy reached Blackmore Castle at midnight. The ruins rose from the Scottish moors like broken teeth, skeletal towers silhouetted against a sky heavy with clouds. No moon, no stars, just darkness pressing down on the ancient stones as if trying to crush them back into the earth. Celeste shivered despite the warmth from the bond. Since the binding, she'd been acutely aware of Dorian's emotions, his determination, his fear for her, and beneath it all, a bone-deep dread of this place. "You've been here before," she said, as they approached the crumbling gates. "Once, 300 years ago." His voice was tight. The entity was stronger then. It had followers, mortals who fed it blood and souls in exchange for dark gifts. "I came to stop them." "What happened?" "I killed the followers, burned their temple. Thought I'd weakened the thing enough that it would fade." His jaw clenched. "I was wrong. It just went dormant, waiting." The car couldn't navigate the overgrown path, so they abandoned it and walked. Dorian carried the satchel and moved with predatory grace through the darkness, his night vision perfect. Celeste stumbled behind him, using her phone's flashlight to avoid roots and stones. The hotel that had occupied the castle was long gone closed. According to Dorian's research, after 3 guests died mysteriously within a single month, the tourism board called it structural failure. Dorian knew better. "The well is in the garden," Celeste said, remembering. "Past the main courtyard, through an archway. Can you find it?" She closed her eyes, reaching for the memory, and felt something else reach back. The curse recognized this place. It knew she'd returned. Through the bond, she felt Dorian's alarm spike as her knees weakened. "It knows I'm here," she gasped. "Fight it." His arm came around her waist, holding her upright. "Don't let it pull you under. Stay with me." She focused on his presence in her mind, using it as an anchor. Slowly, the vertigo receded enough for her to stand on her own. This way, they moved through the ruins carefully, past collapsed halls and chambers open to the sky. Everything was overgrown with thistle and wild roses, nature reclaiming what humans had abandoned. But as they approached the garden, the vegetation died away. The ground became bare earth, cracked and gray. Nothing grew near the well. It sat in the center of what had once been a formal garden. A stone circle perhaps 4 feet across, topped with an iron grate that had rusted into lace. The air around it felt wrong, thick and cold, like standing in a freezer. "There," Celeste whispered. Dorian approached it slowly, every line of his body taut with tension. He crouched beside the well and peered into its depths. Even with his vampire sight, he couldn't see the bottom. "It goes down far, deeper than any well should." He looked up at her. "When you drank from it, did you see anything? Feel anything unusual?" She tried to remember. Marcus had drawn the water up in an old wooden bucket. The water had been so cold it hurt her teeth, and there'd been something in it, not visible exactly, but present, like the weight of attention. "It was watching me," she said. "Even then, I could feel it looking at me through the water. And when you made your wish, I felt hungry. Not my hunger, its hunger, like it was starving, and I'd just offered it a meal." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Dorian, what if this doesn't work? What if feeding it vampire blood just makes it stronger? Then we run." "But we have to try." He stood and began unpacking the satchel, salt, silver, iron, and vials of liquid that gleamed darkly. "I'm going to open the binding between you and the entity. Force it to manifest. When it does, I'll offer it a trade, my blood for its release of you. And if it doesn't want to trade, then I kill it." he said, it simply, as if destroying an ancient entity was merely another task to complete. I've fought worse things than this. I'll fight this too. He worked quickly, drawing a circle of salt around the well, placing iron nails at cardinal points, murmuring words in that old language. The air grew colder, heavier. Celeste's breath fogged in front of her face. Despite the mild night, stay outside the circle, Dorian instructed. No matter what happens, don't cross the salt line. Dorian, promise me, Celeste. The fear in his voice transmitted through the bond like electricity made her nod. I promise. He stepped into the circle and cut his palm with a silver knife. Blood welled up, black in the darkness. He held his hand over the well, letting drops fall into the depths. I am Dorian Blackwood of the Old Blood, he called out. I challenge your claim on this mortal. Face me and name your price. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted, and Celeste's breath caught as pain exploded through her body. It felt like the curse was trying to claw its way out of her from the inside. She fell to her knees outside the circle, gasping. Through tear-blurred vision, she saw something rising from the well, not water, but shadow. Dense and oily, moving with terrible purpose. It took form slowly, a figure taller than any human. Its body composed of darkness and old malice. Its eyes burning like coals in a face that shifted between beautiful and monstrous. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. Blackwood, I remember you. You burned my temple, killed my priests. They were murderers. You made them into monsters. I gave them WH-80 they desired. As I gave her WH-80 she desired, the entity's attention shifted to Celeste, and she felt its hunger slam into her like a physical blow. She wished for love. I showed her the truth of it, that love is betrayal, that hearts are meant to break. You're feeding on her despair, Dorian said, his voice hard, using her suffering as sustenance. That ends tonight. You cannot stop WH-80, she invited. The bond is sealed in blood and wish. Then take mine instead. Dorian held up his bleeding palm. Ancient blood. Vampire blood. More powerful than any mortal's. Release her and feed on me. The entity laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Why would I trade a slow feast for a single meal? Because if you don't, I'll destroy this. Well, seal it with iron and salt and holy water. Trap you here for another 3 centuries, with nothing to feed on but stones and earth. The entity leaned closer, examining him. You would die doing so. The binding, I feel it. Her death is your death. Yes. Then you are a fool, perhaps. But I'm a fool with 700 years of experience in killing things that shouldn't exist. Dorian's smile was terrible. Make your choice. Take my blood willingly, or take nothing at all. The entity circled him, its form rippling. Celeste could feel its consideration, its hunger, warring with its caution. Through the bond, she felt Dorian's resolve absolute and unshakable. He meant every word. He would die to free her. She couldn't let that happen. Before she could think better of it, Celeste grabbed the iron knife from the satchel and cut her own palm. The pain was bright and sharp, clearing her head. She stepped toward the salt circle. Wait, she called out. I have a better offer. Both Dorian and the entity turned to stare at her. Celeste, no, Dorian started. My blood and his blood, she continued, her voice stronger than she felt. Both of us, together, a feast instead of a meal, but only if you break the curse completely. No slow death, no lingering connection. Clean break. The entity's eyes flared brighter. You would offer yourself? I would offer us both, but we do it our way, on our terms. You get what you want, and we get our lives back. She looked at Dorian. Together, through the bond, she felt his fear, his fury, his desperate love, but also his understanding. They'd bound themselves together. Whatever came next, they faced as one. Celeste, he breathed. You don't have to, yes, she said firmly. I do. Chapter 10. The Shoisith entity's laughter echoed across the ruins like thunder. Both of you. Yes, I accept. Wait, Dorian moved to block Celeste from entering the circle. We need terms, guarantees. You can't just, the binding is already made, Celeste said quietly, looking past him to the entity. When I drank from this well, when Dorian bound himself to me, we're already connected to you. Aren't we? The entity's form rippled with something that might have been pleasure. Clever mortal. Yes, the triangle is complete. Your life, his life, my hunger, all intertwined. Dorian's hand caught her wrist, his grip desperate. Celeste, listen to me. Whatever you're planning, I'm planning to live. She met his eyes, willing him to understand through the bond. We both are. Trust me. Through their connection, she felt his terror war with his faith in her. Finally, he nodded and released her wrist. Though his jaw remained tight, Celeste stepped over the salt line into the circle. The cold intensified immediately, but this time she was ready for it. She'd spent months learning to endure pain, to function despite her body's betrayal. This was just another kind of suffering, and she'd survive it the way she'd survived everything else. What happens now? She asked the entity. You offer your blood. I consume it. The curse transfers fully, no longer a slow feeding but a complete bond. Your mortality becomes mine to command. And then you serve me, or you die. Those are the only choices for mortals. Who bargain with old powers. No, Celeste's voice was steady. There's a third option. You take what you need from both of us, his immortal strength, my mortal life, and you let us go. You've been trapped here for centuries, feeding on scraps. We're offering you a genuine feast. Enough power to break free of this well, to exist without needing to curse travelers. The entity went very still. Freedom? Freedom, she confirmed. But not through us. Through our choice to give freely what you've been taking by force. Blood given willingly has more power than blood taken. Isn't that the oldest magic? Beside her, Dorian's sharp intake of breath told her she'd gambled correctly. The entity leaned closer, its burning eyes fixed on her face. You know the old laws. I'm a historian. I study forgotten things. She extended her bleeding palm. So here's my offer. Take enough from both of us to break your chains. In exchange, you sever all curses, all claims. You leave this place and never return. We all get what we want. And if I refuse? If I simply take everything? Then Dorian destroys the well with us inside it, and you get nothing. She smiled grimly. He's old enough and angry enough to do it. You know he is. The entity turned to Dorian, who had drawn the silver sword and held it ready. His expression was calm, resolve, the face of someone who'd made peace with death centuries ago. She's right, he said quietly. I'll burn this place to ash before I let you keep her. The only question is whether you walk away fed or starving. For a long moment, the entity didn't move. Then it reached out one shadowy hand toward Celeste's bleeding palm. Freely given, it said. That is the compact. Your blood and his. Offered without coercion, and in exchange, freedom for all. Agreed, Celeste said. Agreed, Dorian echoed. The entity's hand closed around hers. And pain unlike anything she'd experienced exploded through her body. She heard herself scream, distantly, as if the sound came from someone else. The curse that had been slowly draining her life suddenly reversed instead of taking. The entity was pulling out its own essence, extracting the poison it had planted in her blood. Through the bond, she felt Dorian's agony mirror her own as the entity fed on him simultaneously. His ancient blood and her mortal life, intertwining, creating something new. Something powerful enough to shatter centuries-old chains. The entity grew brighter, more solid, as it consumed their offering. Its form stabilized into something almost beautiful, a figure carved from starlight and shadow. No longer the twisted thing that had lurked in the well's depths. Then, abruptly, it released them both. Celeste collapsed to her knees, gasping. Dorian caught her before she hit the ground, his arms shaking with effort. The entity stood before them, fully manifested, regarding them with something that might have been respect. The compact is sealed. The curse is broken. Its voice was different now, clearer, less distorted by rage and hunger. I am free, and so are you. Where will you go? Celeste managed to ask. Somewhere the old powers still matter. Somewhere I can exist without feeding on suffering. The entity began to fade, its form dissolving into mist. You gave me what centuries of priests and sacrifices could not, a choice. I will remember that. Then it was gone. And they were alone in the circle, with only the wind and the distant cry of night birds. Dorian helped Celeste to her feet, his hands, gentle despite their trembling. Can you feel it? Is the curse really gone? She took inventory of her body. The constant ache in her joints had vanished. The exhaustion that had shadowed every moment for months gone. Even the metallic taste that had haunted her since Scotland had disappeared, leaving only the clean taste of night air. It's gone, she whispered. Dorian, it's really gone. He pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. Through the bond, she felt his relief crash over them both like a wave so intense it brought tears to her eyes. I thought I'd lost you, he said roughly. When you stepped into the circle, when it took hold of you, I thought, I'm here. I'm alive. She pulled back enough to see his face. We're both alive. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You brilliant, reckless, impossible woman. You negotiated with an ancient entity like you were discussing contract terms. I learned from the best. She smiled. You would have destroyed everything to save me. I just found a way to save us all. That's not. He stopped, shook his head. You're right. You saved all of us. Even that cursed thing. They stood there in the ruins, holding each other as the night deepened around them. The bond between them hummed with contentment, with relief, with something neither of them had named yet, but both recognized. What happens now? Celeste asked finally. Dorian was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. Now we have choices, real ones. You're free of the curse, free to live however you want. You could go back to your old life, your apartment, your work, your normal human existence. Without you? He went very still. If that's what you want, the binding, I could break it, set you free completely. And if I don't want to be free of you? His breath caught. Celeste, I'm serious. She pulled back to meet his eyes. These past days with you, I've felt more alive than I did in years before the curse. You see me, all of me, the scared parts, the brave parts, the parts I don't show anyone. Her voice softened. I don't want to go back to being invisible. I don't want to go back to existing instead of living. What are you saying? I'm saying I choose you. I choose this. She touched her chest, where the bond glowed warm. I choose strange libraries and impossible conversations, and someone who understands what it means to be lonely. She smiled. Even if that someone is a 700-year-old vampire with terrible survival instincts, my survival instincts are excellent, he protested. But he was smiling, too, a real smile that transformed his severe face into something almost young. You bound yourself to a dying mortal. Best decision I ever made. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. Are you certain? Because once we leave here together, once you choose this life, there's no going back. You'll be part of my world. The vampire politics, the dangers, the isolation. I've been isolated my whole life. At least with you, I won't be lonely. No, he agreed softly. You'll never be lonely again. I promise you that. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, questioning. But then Dorian's arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and hungry and filled with all the words they hadn't spoken yet. Through the bond, emotions flooded between them, gratitude and desire and hope, and a love too new to name but impossible to deny. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. We should go, Dorian said reluctantly. Find somewhere safe before the sun rises. Where? I have a cottage. In Ireland, isolated, beautiful, no vampire politics for 500 miles. He smiled. I was saving it for when I needed to disappear. Seems like the right time. Together? Together, he confirmed. For as long as you'll have me. That might be a very long time. I'm stubborn, remember? I'm counting on it. He took her hand, and they walked out of the ruins together, leaving the broken well and its ended curse behind them. As they reached the car, Celeste paused and looked back at Blackmore one last time. The castle ruins stood silent against the lightening sky, no longer malevolent, just old stones surrendering to time. Thank you, she whispered to the entity, to the curse, to whatever twist of fate had brought her here, because, yes, she'd nearly died. Yes, she'd suffered, but she'd also found Dorian, found courage she didn't know she had, found a life worth living instead of just enduring, and that, she thought, as Dorian started the car and they drove away from Blackmore toward whatever future they'd build together, was worth every moment of darkness. The curse had promised her love. In breaking it, she'd found something better, a partnership, a choice, a beginning.